Illinois, January 5th, 2000. Witnesses report a giant, slow-moving black triangle. Its flight characteristics defy explanation, and the Air Force denies any knowledge of the object. What did they see? Was it a secret government aircraft or something out of this world? Let's find out on this week's episode, The Illinois Triangles. It's the Alien Conspiracy Podcast. We are your hosts, Agent ETA and
Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. Follow the show on Twitter at AlienConPod. But first, it's time for strange events, bizarre facts, the unbelievable revealed. This is the Mind Boggle of the Week. The Estimate of the Situation, or ETOS. Before Project Blue Book, before Project Grudge, there was Project Sign. We first learned of Project Sign and the ETOS in 1956 when retired Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt published his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. Intelligence organizations often write an estimate of the situation to provide, well, an estimate of the situation. Project Sign investigated UFO reports for a year and came to a tentative conclusion. UFOs were intelligently controlled extraterrestrial craft. This controversial opinion was summarized in 1948 when Project Sign authored their estimate. People at the highest levels of command didn't like it one bit and ordered the document destroyed. Supposedly all copies were burned, and the Air Force maintains to this day that it never existed in the first place. While we don't have a copy of this infamous report, or proof of its existence, several credible witnesses such as Dr. Alan Hynek and Major Dewey Fournet confirmed that they saw a copy and that Ruppelt's description of the document was correct. So basically the Air Force determined all the way back in 1948 that ET was visiting us. Why was the report destroyed? Were they afraid that the public might panic? Perhaps some dark conspiracy was at work. Whatever the reason for suppressing the estimate of the situation, the fact that our government came to this conclusion so many years ago boggles the mind. And now it's time for the show.
All right, so this case I think is a really awesome case to mention to anybody because of not necessarily how solid picture information or physical evidence for the case may be, but how solid the actual witnesses are. And the entire legitimacy, I think, of the case rides upon that. There's only one picture taken of the object that we're going to mention, and it's a pretty subpar picture. There's not a whole lot you can tell besides there's a couple lights in it, you know?
Right.
But this case is awesome just because of the people that witnessed it and what they actually were willing to do as far as risk their names, I guess you could say, because a lot of the witnesses in this case were police officers.
Yeah. And another thing that's important, I think, to mention is that the witnesses were independent witnesses.
Yes.
So they weren't all at the same place. And most of their stories go something like this. They hear the radio chatter and then they think it must be a joke, or they ask the dispatcher, this is a joke, right? And then they're basically laughing at it with their buddies until they see it themselves, and then they start taking it seriously. So that's one of the important things for a good sighting, is that the witnesses are independent. It gives a lot more credibility than a couple of friends hanging out who could easily hoax something.
Yeah. And the chain of events follows a very precise timeline, and it also follows the direction in which the object was traveling as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about the beginning of the event. The first sighting was at 10:30 p.m. and is actually on the 4th. Most people mention this event as having taken place on the 5th, but the first potential sighting was actually on the 4th at 10:30 p.m., and that was in Lake Forest, Illinois.
That is correct.
And do you know who made that sighting?
From what I could tell, it was an anonymous report.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't find any names either. I was looking for some names for that particular timestamp, and I couldn't find any.
I think the one at 10:30 came out after the fact. I think that was a civilian witness who saw this stuff and then came out after the whole event hit the news. So
Oh,
it wasn't a part of the evening's narrative as far as, the radio communications and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. But in the interest of chronological order, we want to start off with the first potential sighting as far as time goes. So the next sighting was where it kind of kicks off as far as the story goes, and that was going to be at 4 a.m. I believe, and that was by a truck driver named Melvin Knoll.
Yeah, so I want to go through the sightings, what they described, though, because the descriptions are a little different between the witnesses.
Oh, yeah.
So Lake Forest, what I have is that they reported a triangular-shaped UFO, much bigger than a 747, headed towards them from the northeast. They said it was slow and silent, and it had 500 lights spaced evenly across the underside, and it went directly overhead. Mm-hmm. So this is, every witness has a little different view of it. This guy had it go directly overhead. That didn't happen to all the witnesses, and they all describe different things depending on their vantage point, whether they're seeing the same craft or who knows, it's anybody's guess. But I think that's an important detail to put in there. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Why don't you, do you want to continue with Melvin Knoll?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and continue with old Melvin, or Melvin. I've seen a couple different spellings of his name, but I'm going to call him Melvin. I prefer that name. So he's a truck driver, and at 4 a.m., he was arriving back to his office because he was done with his deliveries for the day. So he says that he looks up as he's getting out of his truck, and he sees a very bright star, and he just, makes a mental note, I suppose, and saying that, that's brighter than normal. He says he spends a couple minutes inside the office. He comes out, and he looks back up in the sky, and he sees that bright light is moving. He said it was moving off to the southwest. So he said he saw the star grow larger, and that there were red lights flashing underneath it as well. And he says he could see the side view of the craft. He says that there was about 6 windows alongside the craft, and it was very bright inside these windows, very bright lights coming out. I think he said it was traveling very slow. It wasn't making any noise. He said it stopped for a short period of time and then proceeded to move along the same route as before.
Yeah, and then the next report we have is just a few minutes later, 12 minutes later at 4:12 a.m. in Lebanon. Dispatch contacts Officer Ed Barton and asked him to look for the UFO. He thought it was a joke at first, but then he saw it in the direction of Summerfield. He turned on the lights of his vehicle and headed towards it at high speed. And while he was headed towards it, an anonymous civilian saw it for about 2 minutes. They described it as being about 900 feet in altitude, a distance of about 800 feet. And they said it was at least 2 times the size of a C-5 cargo plane, or 450 feet across. And the reason they probably said C-5 cargo plane is because this is near an Air Force base, and C-5 cargo planes are very commonly seen in the sky. And I Googled a picture of one, and they are friggin' huge. They're big. Anyways, it was boomerang shaped, and it had lights around the perimeter. It moved slowly and had a quiet rumbling sound like a V8 engine. It moved west towards Lebanon. Okay, do you want to pick up with the rest of Ed Barton's description?
Yeah, absolutely. So Officer Barton of the Lebanon Police Department, when he first received the call from dispatch, he asked first if the guy was DUI, if he was drunk, because something like that you want to make sure that the person's not under the influence of something. So is there any point to look into what the person is claiming to begin with, right?
Yeah. Although a lot of these cases you see and say, oh, well, were they drunk when they saw it? I was like, you know what, dude, I've had quite a few, I've tossed back a few in my time and I've never once hallucinated anything. How cool would that be if all you had to do is drink a few beers and go outside and look up and you saw UFOs, right? Am I right?
Yeah, I'd be drinking a lot more beer, I can tell you that much.
But anyways, that doesn't really matter for the Barton sighting. Sorry for that little diversion. Continue, please.
Oh, it's no big deal. So the reason why obviously dispatch was requesting this was because, the truck driver Melvin Nolhide came in and was very particular about how he was describing. He was very adamant, he definitely saw something, and that's the reason why the dispatcher decided to basically say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this out over the radio just to see if somebody might have seen something as well. So you can actually hear people in the background laughing, like in some of these clips and stuff, some of the audio recordings of the dispatch. And,
I think it might be important for us to mention that. We didn't mention that. You can find actual recordings of the police radio during the event.
Oh yeah, and I think those are very important to listen to because it kind of adds a level of sincerity to the evidence because these people aren't acting. You can tell they're pretty genuine about the way that they're reacting to the situation. It's an odd situation, and they feel very uneasy about it.
Right, and this isn't something they did in a studio. These are the actual live radio communications, and it would be very unusual for them to hoax all this stuff. And they definitely do seem very genuine in the recordings.
So after Officer Barton decides to go ahead and look into what was being talked about over the dispatch.
Yeah, remember he was chasing it with his lights on his vehicle.
Yeah, he turned his wigwags on.
Yeah, and then he pulled over. Is that the technical term for him? Wigwags?
Yeah, I always thought that was I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason why they're called that, but I always thought that was the dumbest name for spinning red and blue lights.
I imagine that came up in a city council meeting. You go, why are you guys zooming around with your lights on all the time? You go, oh, what are wigwags? They're just wigwags. Don't worry about it, man. I go, yeah. Oh, they're wigwags. Well, that sounds really cute. We can deal with that.
Don't you worry about them wigwags there, sir.
I've never heard that before.
It's probably just whoever designed the thing just called them wigwags.
Yeah, could be. So Officer Barton pulls over. He chases it for a little while. Then he pulls over to the side of the road to view the object. Mm-hmm. He shut down his car and his lights so that he could see it because, lights are bright. He sees it headed towards Lebanon. It has bright white light on each corner and red blinking light on the bottom center. The forward light shot a beam toward the ground, but it didn't actually touch the ground. About 1,000 feet up, it stopped. It hovered for a little bit, and then it did a pivot in place, like a 100, or not 180, but like a 90-degree pivot in place, and then continued moving slowly on its path. And that's a very important observation because we don't really have any aircraft that can make a dead stop, pivot in place, and then continue on. At least not that we know of.
Yeah.
So it made a pivot, and then it continued on. The rear of the object had a solid white light across the back with a thin strip of multicolored lights in the center and horizontal.
You said it looked a lot like a rainbow, right?
Yeah. He reached into his car radio to talk to dispatch. It took him about 3 or 4 seconds, he said. And when he looked back up, the object had gone about 6 miles away toward Shiloh. And a rough calculation would indicate that would be about 7,000 miles per hour. I didn't find that number online. I kind of did that calculation myself. So it's probably completely inaccurate. But anyways, really fast. That would be far faster than anything we have.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm going to be doing this quite a bit, but I think the audio evidence that came out of that dispatch center is very important because you can hear the way that these officers are reacting to this. One of the quotes that you can look up, you can find these recordings. Officer Barton says, "Be advised, there is a very bright light, a white light east of town, and it keeps changing colors. I'll go over there and see maybe if it's an aircraft. It doesn't look like an aircraft though." So, he was assessing the situation as he was going. Let's see. He also says, "It's not a moon. It's not a star. And he also says that later on in an interview, he had said that it looked like a long black mass, a triangle. It was moving, it was moving slow, and yeah, when the craft turned around, that's when it revealed the rainbow. But these recordings are very important, because it's kind of written in stone, I guess you could say,
Yeah, and it's a primary source. It's not what a newspaper is saying about the event, which I've found to be incredibly unreliable. It's the actual event we have on tape, which is pretty rare. The only other one I can think of off the top of my head where we have an audio tape while the event is happening would be the Rendlesham Forest incident, which I think we discussed that one very briefly on our one of our Lake and Heath Bentwaters episode.
Yeah. Well, and also these officers, people have to keep in mind as well, every single thing that they say on dispatch obviously is recorded. And whatever they say on dispatch, they have to basically be confident that they can defend what they said in court, because anything that they say on that radio can be used in court if it happens to be necessary. As the UFO was following its path, the next witness was an officer out of Shiloh. Is that correct?
Yeah, Officer David Martin is what I have next.
Okay, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Officer David Martin of Shiloh, he heard the radio chatter about the object. 51 seconds after Barton reported it near Shiloh, Martin saw it. He was driving east on Lebanon Avenue. He said it had 3 lights on the bottom and a line toward the back. It had red and green blinking lights in front of the 3 lights. He pulled over and noted that it was silent. He estimated the width at the size of a football field, 100 yards. The underside was irregular, like it had plumbing and pieces of Legos. One section appeared to be lower than the others, and he compared it to the way a battleship looks. So if you think of the tower on a battleship, probably like turned upside down on the bottom of the object. While he was watching it, it shot away suddenly in the blink of an eye without any sound to the west over the Belleville area. And so do you have any thoughts on the David Martin sighting of this thing?
What he describes definitely doesn't seem like something that's a technology that I've ever seen. And the main reason why is because it slowed down, hovered, and then took off at a very high rate of speed. Right. I've heard some theories about, it could be a stealth blimp. I've heard that term thrown around. But if it was a stealth blimp or something, then it wouldn't be able to take off like how he described. It definitely could hover and move at these slow speeds and stuff, and it could be as large as well, I think, that people are describing, but it wouldn't be able to take off like he was describing.
Well, especially silently. So an object large would not be able to withstand whether or not there were passengers in it, because certainly no people in there would be able to withstand the G-forces, but the airframe would not be able to withstand the G-forces either with traditional propulsion methods. And again, it wouldn't be silent. So the only way that it could move that quickly would be as if it had some kind of novel propulsion system like the Alcubierre drive that we talked about before.
I almost thought you were going to say El Cucuy.
El Cucuy. I almost did say that. The name of the guy slipped my mind for a moment there.
Who? Tony Ferguson?
Yeah, Tony. Yeah. No, Dr. Alcubierre, who theorized the drive where it bends space-time around the ship rather than the ship just moving through. Anyways, it would have to have something like that to where it wasn't subject to the forces of inertia. Otherwise, the thing would just get ripped apart. So next up we have at 4:39 a.m. The next one I have is 4:39 a.m. and Millstat. Do you want to talk a little bit about about him?
I will. One of the this is actually probably my favorite series of dispatch interactions, just because of how he reacted to it. And I think you could tell in interviews and stuff that's available online. You could see about that this guy gave. He seems pretty genuine. He seems like a bit of a character. But so Craig Stevens, when he was talking to dispatch and he was reporting on the object that he was viewing while he was talking to him, he says that the object is huge. Dispatch asked him, "What does it look like to you?" He says it looks kind of like a V-shaped object. And then it was kind of funny because the dispatcher hums the Twilight Zone theme song. And then he replies back, "Yeah, really," or something like that, you know? But yeah, Officer Stevens decided to stop his vehicle, and he went to his truck immediately. It seems like instinctually. I think he actually described it like that as well. But back then he had a Polaroid camera in his trunk. He snaps a picture of it, and that's the only tangible, actual evidence that we have relating to the sighting is that one Polaroid picture. And anybody can pull up a picture online of it and see it's not very clear in any way, shape, or form, really. It's very dark. You can see some lights in it, but there's no really, as far as my opinion goes, there's no really real conclusions you can make from that photo. You know, it could be recreated in any number of ways.
The photo is interesting, and there has been some analysis on it. The lights on the photo have sort of like a J shape that would be caused if you press the button. That could cause that J shape because the action of pressing the button moves the camera. So
okay.
The photo does look genuine. It does not look like it was hoaxed or fabricated. But again, like you're saying, it's basically just a black photo. It's just completely black with some squiggly lights on there. But there are some you can find online. People have taken it and tried to get rid of the squigglies and see how the lights would look if it had been taken while the camera was still. And it doesn't disprove the sighting. So it does match up with what the sightings say, but unfortunately the photo's not clear enough to make out any details.
Yeah, which is a shame because, you know, that year 2000, that was, you know, getting into some, you know, the cusp of when we started to see some better technology as far as like digital cameras and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
So if only he would have had, you know, something cool in his trunk to take a better picture, or even just, you know, a regular camera with film.
Yeah.
You know?
I read that also that it was very cold that night and the temperature may have affected the quality of the photo as well, but I don't know that much about Polaroid, so I can't really say one way or the other if that's true.
Yeah, I think I've used them a couple times in my life. I've never owned a Polaroid camera.
Officer Craig Stevens described the object as being arrowhead-shaped and with a concave rear. It had a horizontally moving strobe light on the rear of the craft. The whole rear face was white lights. He said it was about 500 feet off the ground, and he heard a faint buzz like the buzz from a power transformer. He said the texture looked blocky, also like a battleship. The stars above the object were projected on its underside, which I think is a pretty significant detail. And that's also, if you remember, that's a detail that a lot of the witnesses to the Phoenix Lights, another triangle sighting, they also said that it made the stars look shimmery or that the stars were projected on the bottom of the craft from above. And to me, this sort of seems like it might support. I was thinking about it, and at first I thought maybe it's some sort of crude stealth type technology, but then I thought, if they were trying to be stealthy, why would they have all these lights on everywhere? So maybe it's a result of some sort of novel propulsion system like the Alcubierre drive. Yeah. How if it's bending space-time, as a result, it might also bend light around the craft. It might create this bubble and sort of distort things. So who knows? But it's a really interesting detail.
I agree that is one thing that kind of has stood out to me is the flashing lights that people do claim to have seen. Yeah. I mean, if it's alien, why the hell would it have flashing lights? You know, because what is the point? What's the reason? You know.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, if it was a terrestrial vehicle, it would have to be a black project. 100% would have to be a black project. But first, let me finish up with Officer Stevens.
I wonder if they still have to abide by OSHA standards.
Yeah, I bet.
Maybe that's the reason why those lights are there.
So Officer Stevens, like you said, took the Polaroid, and he also saw the object make a slow turn in place as it sort of hovered. Again, like what the other officers saw. So I just wanted to finish up that. I wanted to add that he saw it make a quick turn, or a slow turn in there before we talked about more stuff. But yeah, if it was a black project, it might have lights on, but if it was a black project, they wouldn't fly it over civilian airspace like this. Like it was not necessarily going in a straight line. It was flying, from this point to that point and then making turns and flying around.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of airspace where they fly this kind of airplanes, like, Area 51 or Edwards Air Force Base. That's like out in the middle of nowhere. They don't fly this stuff over airports. That's just not generally how the government operates. Anything's possible, but...
Well, and I think it is also important to note as well that there's two military Air Force bases in that area. Scott Air Force Base is the main Air Force base that most people mention, but there's also another one, which is Whiteman Air Force Base that's off to the west, I believe, of where this whole incident took place. And interestingly enough, that's the only place in the world, as far as in North America, I don't know about the world to be for sure, but it's the only place that the United States flies B-2 stealth bombers out of.
And there's also St. Louis International Airport that's not that far away, in addition to those two bases.
Yes.
All right, so next up we have Officer Matt Janey saw the object. Do you want to tell us a little bit about his sighting?
So at any rate, at 4:37 a.m., moments later after Officer Stevens had witnessed what he witnessed, there was an officer from Dupo that chimed in into dispatch as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Agent Anderson?
Yeah, Officer Matt Janey had heard the radio chatter, traveling northbound on Interstate 255. He was looking for the object, and he pulled over to look for it, and he was joined by another officer. They joked about the object a little bit while they listened to the radio chatter. The other officer left, and Janey continued driving. After he drove for a little while, he saw a brightly lit object to the east. The altitude was similar to an aircraft on landing approach. Its lights were brighter than a normal aircraft would be. He saw a large red light on the bottom of the craft, and white lights flashing around the object's perimeter. He said he also saw it through binoculars. So we know that he wasn't just reporting a strange light on the horizon, he saw it close up through binoculars. And I say that because with this particular report, skeptics like to say, oh, he just saw a light at the distance, because he didn't report it going directly overhead like some of the other witnesses.
Yeah.
But he did report seeing it through binoculars, so we know that he saw with good detail that it was definitely an unusual craft.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was also in the mind state of attempting to observe what he was looking at. He wasn't just happening to see something. He was trying to see something, right? I mean,
yeah.
I know the way I'm describing it is very simplistic, but that's a very important distinction, as far as his observation is concerned.
And St. Louis International Airport asked him to confirm the object's location and told him that they did not have the object on radar. Okay, and I just have one more sighting for the event, the final sighting, which was in Centerville, East St. Louis at 6:50 a.m. Did you get any notes on this one? It's a school teacher, Stephen Winnacotwas.
I was waiting to see how you're going to pronounce that. Yeah, I was going to base my pronunciation off of yours, the mistakes that you had made. So
I'm trying to be serious here, man. This is serious.
Yeah, whichever comes first, So yeah, Stephen Winnacott. I'm just going to pronounce it Winnacott.
Okay.
So yeah, he's a high school teacher, and he claims that he saw it in the sky. He thought it may have been a plane from the nearby airport, the public airport that you were talking about. What was the name of that?
That was St. Louis International Airport.
Oh, the old St. Louis. That's right.
Yeah.
And it had 3 bright lights on it, 3 very bright white lights, but it did not have the normal red and green navigation lights that you'd normally see on a plane. He claimed as the sun came up, he could see that the craft was shaped like an arrowhead. It didn't have wings or horizontal stabilizers like you would normally see on an aircraft.
All right, I think that's all of the sightings we have for this particular event. Now let's go ahead and let's just talk about some of the interesting things that came up when I was looking into this. So one idea that came up was that if it was a government craft of some kind, like let's say a stealth blimp or whatever, that we would know about it by now, because this was in 2000, remember? And it's almost 20 years later. Now, just to put it into perspective, in the 1980s, we knew pretty much everything that they had going on in the 1960s. I mean, 20 years is a long time, but I'm kind of skeptical of this viewpoint, because just because it was 20 years ago doesn't mean that the government would reveal the secret project. What do you think, Agent ETA?
I would agree with that point of view for sure, because you never know what the real reason why information like that is released, technology is released. I would always assume that if something is released, as far as like a stealth plane or some new design for a tank or whatever weapon of some sort, right? It's because they already have something else new and shiny waiting in the wings, you know?
Right.
They release that because it's not a big deal if they do. I mean, at least I would assume if I were in their shoes, that, you know, I guess I would do it like that. But, you know, it's kind of funny. There's some things that kind of stood out to me that weren't necessarily stated in particular. Like for instance, how the Air Force reacted to it. So they're one of the representatives, they're public officials, or I'm sorry, what is the term? The public, I'm brain farting right now.
Public information officer, maybe? I
think it's a public information officer, whoever generally responds to like media, you know. But I know that the guy's name was Lieutenant Colonel Alan Danke. I'm not sure. The way his name is spelled is Dahnske.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I'm going to pronounce it Danke because that sounds fun to me, you know?
Yeah.
So anyways, he's one of those like public information officers for the Scott Air Force Base. And the way that they reacted to it was basically they don't know nothing. We didn't see nothing. Nothing's happening. You know, like they didn't have a story ready. You know, one of the quotes that I could actually quote him as having said is, "Our airfield was closed during that time," and he even said that the control tower was closed as well. There was nobody in there. You know, they said that they didn't have any kind of stealth operations out of that base, which it appears that would be true, because why would you if you have another base that is already handling that, you know, pretty close, you know?
Yeah. I also read that they claimed they didn't have any working radar on the base, which is ridiculous because you could drive by it and actually see the radar spinning around out there. So they're just...
And why wouldn't you have constant radar up? Right? Why wouldn't you be constantly monitoring the area? I mean, I don't know. I've never worked in that industry, so it's not like I know the ins and outs. I can only assume, and obviously assumptions can be naive. So,
yeah, but you can't imagine having an air base without a radar. It just seems kind of silly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially a military base.
Yeah.
Of all bases, you know, well, I mean, any base, right? But, you know, there's actually been a couple interesting things that have came to fruition, I guess, out of this incident. There was a company called Sigma Animation that conducted a full-scale investigation of the incident. With the intent of recreating the event in animation. I guess this company had a very well, I don't know how long of a history, but they had a good reputation at the time of recreating events in courtrooms and offering those recreations to either defense teams or prosecution teams as, you know, a piece of not necessarily evidence, but you know, a piece of animation to describe exactly what happened, I guess you could say, right? So this team, this investigation was headed up by this fellow named David Mesa. David Mesa. So he was a technical animator, and they actually hired different people. This guy, Eric Euclid, he was a private investigator from Philadelphia. And the guy had supposedly over 10 years of like field interview experience before they hired him. And he was the guy that conducted all the interviews with the people that had experienced this event, and they used his interviews to recreate the event basically in animation. And some of this is there's one documentary that talks about it. I forget the name of the documentary, but they go over it pretty thoroughly, and the way that they recreate it, it's pretty rudimentary, like as far as like, you know, the type of effects that we're used to seeing in movies and stuff like that nowadays. It's going to look like a pretty crude rendering, I guess you could say, but it's still nonetheless kind of cool that somebody took the effort to go out there and actually spend money and time to recreate the event that happened, you know. And I think that also speaks to the legitimacy of the type of witnesses that are involved in this case. Because if you didn't have this type of legitimacy, then somebody like that wouldn't have spent that time and effort into investigating it and recreating it.
One interesting thing about this case, hold on, let me do a different segue there.
I wonder how much of that. I wonder how much of my rant that you're gonna have to edit out, right? That I just
no,
made.
that was good. That was good. I don't really have anything to add because I think you pretty much said it all for that little subtopic. I was just gonna switch because I have a bunch of miscellaneous things, but they don't really necessarily segue to each other all that easily. But there's stuff I think worth mentioning, and I'm sure you have some stuff too. A lot of skeptics try and dismiss this case because the witnesses have very different descriptions.
One notable individual that I kind of thought was interesting that the person would comment on the incident. The person, so this guy, his name is Chuck Eastlake, and he's an aeronautics professor, and he claims that he did a study on the event. And especially he did a study on the claim that people were making that it was a B-2 bomber, basically, because, you know, the B-2 bomber is triangular in shape. It's a wedge, right? Yeah. It's a flying wedge, I think is a term. And basically he made a very simple statement, basically saying that if it was a B-2 bomber, then it was propelled by something that we don't know of, because the absolute bare minimum, like mile per hour at least, that a B-2 bomber can fly is 140 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. So if it was flying at 140 miles an hour, some of these maneuvers that are claimed to have been witnessed would be basically impossible, you know? Yeah.
A lot of the skeptics will say that you can dismiss this case because the witnesses all describe different objects. Some of them describe, you know, a boomerang. Some of them describe something that's more of like a rectangle. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, if you could imagine, let's say, an arrowhead-shaped object with a rough surface, that could very easily explain why, viewing it from different angles, you would see different light configurations and different shapes, especially at night when you probably couldn't see the outline of the object very well.
Yeah, at nighttime with a large object like that, and especially, you know, that you're probably going to be at awe at what you're experiencing, it could be, you know, you could misinterpret what you're seeing, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah.
That could easily happen.
One of my favorite, well, not one of my favorite, this case actually has attached to it the best skeptical explanation of all time. This is my absolute favorite. Tops everything. Okay. This is even better than swamp gas.
I think I know where you're going, yes.
Philip J. Klass, who is everybody who knows anything about skeptics, he's like the biggest name in skeptics, or at least he was. I think he passed away. But his explanation for this case was, drum roll please, the planet Venus, which I'm sure you knew I was going to say Venus because it's always Venus. But still, when you have a case where people are reporting, you know, something the size of 2 football fields flying around, it looks like a triangle and all this other, you know, completely fantastical things. And then he just looks at the case.
You know, it's a triangular shaped aircraft that's moving very slowly, quietly. Sometimes it's making a humming noise. You know, it has a rainbow at the back of it in between, you know, these very bright lights and stuff. And it's Venus.
Yeah, Venus. Has to be Venus.
Naturally.
So I like that's, usually these guys are ridiculous, but this one is it's just so disconnected from what the witnesses saw. I don't know if he was senile or if he was maybe he read one case and then he thought he was commenting on a different case. I don't know, but it's my favorite just because of how ridiculous it is.
Rather lazy, sir. Not well met at all.
I found some reports. For example, there are claims that television stations were silenced. The government said, don't report it. And one of the police officers reported that two men from the government, he said it was probably someone from the federal government, told him to stop talking about it. Did you see any reports like that where the government was trying to hush up the case at all?
No more than what you already just said. There's not a whole lot that, as far as that goes, that I know about. But I know that one thing that really kind of struck me about this is the similarities to other events that have happened, not just in this country, in the United States, but worldwide.
Right.
I mean, first of all, okay, so in this country, another triangular shaped object that was observed was March 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona, where hundreds of people saw a triangular shaped object with bright white lights under it, and another very interesting series of events happened in Belgium so it was throughout 1989 through 1991. Thousands of people reported seeing triangular shaped objects above Belgium. And the cool thing about this is it was triangular shaped crafts with white lights on the bottom and red blinking lights in the center.
Right.
How very interesting, right? I mean,
and it's interesting you bring that up too, because generally speaking, when you have top secret technology, it won't stay the same for so many decades. And like you're saying, we have very similar reports throughout many decades all over the world. And it's sort of, it seems implausible to me that all of those could be due to the same top secret aircraft. I guess you could say that a lot of countries around the world are building the same thing, but it's really worth mentioning, I think.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. Because this isn't a standalone incident, I don't think.
Oh, not at all.
I think that this craft is the same craft that has been observed in a couple different spots. I couldn't tell you who may be in control of it. I really have no idea. But I think because of the similarities between some descriptions of events, it lines up well enough with this event where I think this craft has been experimented with in different spots around the world. Maybe it's something that has been around for a while and they're just... All right, so basically, I'll come out straight and say it rather than beating around the bush. I think that this craft is a government technology, whether it be a government like the United States, whether it be China, whether it be Russia, whoever the heck it may be. I think that this is a technology that has been around for a little bit at least. Maybe not, 60 years, 70. I think maybe more so around the lines of maybe 30, 40 years. And it's something that is potentially, a research craft of sorts. And the only reason why I say that is because of the long span of sightings that line up with this description of a triangle-shaped craft with white, bright lights under it and red blinking light in the middle. Some of these descriptions are far spread in the timeline. You know what I mean? So maybe it's something that is used as a experimental craft that's collects data from time to time using this particular type of technology, right? So that it's like a way to get a baseline reading, I guess, on this technology. I don't think I'm describing it quite thoroughly enough. Maybe I'm not capable of doing that.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe I have also gone too far down the rabbit hole.
Maybe, yeah. So aliens.
So what do you think?
I think it's a possibility that this could be an alien craft. I think we've covered the possibility that it's a government craft, and I think that's plausible.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's completely plausible, like you were just saying, that this is a top secret craft of some kind. But they would have to have some sort of really advanced propulsion capabilities in order for this to move. And it's possible. It's very possible that they've developed that and we just don't know about it. But on the other hand, it's possible, I think, for it to be an alien craft as well. And I think you mentioned earlier, why would an alien craft have lights on it? Maybe they would just put lights on there so they don't get collided with from our airplanes, because even if they're high technology, we could still damage their craft by running a 747 into it. So I don't know, that just occurred to me while we were talking earlier. I didn't get a chance to say it.
Yeah.
But
that's possible, because from their perspective, they may see us flying as basically like flying blind in one direction, you know?
Right.
They may see us as just Neanderthals with this ability that we don't have the full control over yet.
Yeah. And I saw a witness statement so this witness came out many years after the event, and I didn't put it in the main narrative because it's after the fact. So in my opinion, it's not as reliable, but there's a witness that said he was driving a big rig and he pulled over on the side of the road and he saw the object, but he saw a triangle on one side and then a rectangle object on the other. So he saw two different objects simultaneously. And this could also explain the different descriptions that the witnesses had. But the descriptions in general with like the pipes and looking like a battleship with like tons of stuff sticking off of it. And it doesn't sound like something we would build. But again, just because it doesn't behave and look like something that we know of doesn't mean that it wasn't built by somebody on Earth. But on the other hand, I think, like I already said, I think there's a good chance it could be extraterrestrial as well. But unfortunately, there's really no way of knowing without the government coming forward and telling us what they know about it, which of course they'll never do.
Yeah, you're right about that. On this one in particular, I'm very open to interpretation, just because of how there's so many different possibilities with this one. I'm waiting for more information. I hope that some does come out, but I think there's enough to know at the very least that this was a real incident. That these people really saw something, and they reacted to something. You know, it wasn't something that was a cheap publicity stunt. You know what I mean? Well, shit. I believe it was the Highland Police Department or the Lebanon Police Department. I forget which one it was, but one of those two departments actually published information about the sighting on their website, on the police department website. You know, why would they do that unless they think something actually really happened?
I kind of want it to be a top secret aircraft because it's just kind of easier. It sits easier in my mind. But I keep going back to certain facts of the witnesses, like how fast it moved from pretty much a dead stop. And so we're talking about approximately 7,000 miles per hour. And that's like Mach 10 or something. That's really, really fast. And it's not just a matter of having the energy to propel something that quickly. It's also the air resistance at such a low altitude, whether it's 1,000 feet or 5,000 feet. The wind resistance, the inertial forces of accelerating that quickly, it would just tear any craft apart. So like I think I touched on earlier, you would have to have something that would bend stuff around the aircraft, or that it would be able to move through normal matter like air without any resistance at all. Basically, it would not be touching the air in some way. And it just kind of stretches, I think, the capabilities of what we can do. Do we really have something that can do this? I suppose you could argue maybe it's like a holographic projection or something like that. That would make sense.
Yeah. Or it could be, technology that we recovered from an alien aircraft that had possibly crashed, right? And that we reverse engineered. I think that's a complete possibility as well.
Yeah, that's another possibility. But whatever the case is, it's a really fun case for me because it's completely open-ended. And like you were saying, it could be a lot of different things. You kind of just have to think about it and use your imagination, I suppose, to imagine what it could be. That's everything I have to say about this case. Have you anything else to add?
No, I think that's gonna do it. That's about everything that I have at the moment. The next thing that we do have lined up, though, is going to be relating to the Federal Reserve, and I do think that this is going to be a series of episodes that will hopefully spark some deep interest for people, if at least they haven't looked into this type of information yet.
Oh yeah, this is going to be exciting for me. It's a really interesting. There's just so much there. We have to do multiple episodes on it, I think. I don't know if we're going to do them back to back or maybe we'll take a break, but there's just so much there. And that I think next time we're just going to do the history of how the Federal Reserve was formed, because that in and of itself was a conspiracy. And it's not like doing a history report or something. Like, this stuff is a conspiracy. And it's a living conspiracy that's with us right now as we speak.
Affects every single one of us, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because in previous episodes, we've kind of referenced, you know, other things that we can make whole series of episodes about, right? Well, this is a topic, just for reference, this is a topic that you can make an entire channel about with never-ending episodes. I mean, there's so much involved with what has happened in reference to the Federal Reserve and other incarnations of that type of an entity just in this country alone, let alone the history of the human race and how you know, different type of financial cycles and different types of control over financial systems have evolved. I mean, how deep do you want to go? You know, that old saying, follow the money. Man, if you really want to know some truth of human civilizations and some of the paths and that we followed, you know, follow the money, man.
The Federal Reserve, when I started learning about, let me put it this way, I don't think we need a mind boggle for these episodes, because the case is the mind boggle. It's just unreal.
Well, we could do a mind boggle. Maybe the first one would be, well, here's a mind boggle for you.
The whole episode.
Well, I mean, it could be as simple as the Federal Reserve, the name itself. It's not federal as far as an entity would go. And also, as far as we know, it doesn't seem like it has reserves as well.
Right.
So that's a boggle in itself right there, just a name.
Or we could do, I was also thinking, I don't know if you follow this stuff, but recently they started, they always use this creative terminology. So recently they started, quote unquote, injecting $70 billion a night into the overnight markets. And they just say, oh, it's cool. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. It's fine. We're just injecting money into the system. It's cool. No big. Yeah, okay, wait. Yeah. What? $70 billion? That's a lot of friggin' money. That's bigger than a lot of corporations, you know?
They glanced over that a bit faster than you'd think they should.
Yeah.
That's a capital B there.
Yeah.
You know?
That's, I mean, we won't go into size comparisons. Yeah, that's a lot of friggin' money, though. We'll end up the episode, as usual, with a quote, this time from Albert Einstein. Why should the Earth be the only planet supporting human life? It is not singular in any other respect, but if intelligent creatures do exist, as we may assume they do elsewhere in the universe, I should not expect them to try to communicate with the Earth by wireless radio. Light rays, the direction of which can be controlled much more easily, would more probably be the first method attempted. Okay, thanks for listening.